Hello, everyone. I am Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. We are going to be talking about some Van Halen tonight, some revolutionary comics, specific imprint, which was Hard Rock Comics, and get into all that in a second. Halen. I'm actually a huge Van Halen fan. See, one of the reasons I wanted to do these types of videos is because I grew up on comic book superheroes. I grew up on comic books. That was my thing. That was my geeky thing, collecting, following the heroes, really into it. Then in high school, I never stopped liking superheroes, never stopped liking comic books, but I didn't really collect comic books anymore, at least not on a weekly basis or anything. I'd go in and pick up a graphic novel occasionally, stuff like that. What my geeky turn, of high school and my teenage years really turned to was music. I was a bass player. I played bass in a bunch of little bands here and there, still do play bass. And music was just everything to me. That was just, and by music, it was rock. It was hard rock, so stuff like Van Halen, White Snake, Aerosmith, that typical kind of hard rock. I really got into this line of comics that I saw at the store each week. The company is called Revolutionary Comics, and I looked up a little bit of some of the stuff they did. This is they had a couple imprints here. This is one of them here. I've got there's the same thing on my thumbnail there, but Revolutionary Comics was the company's name. They started a couple imprints. At first, it was Rock and Roll Comics. Then they changed it to Hard Rock Comics. They had another imprint that did some pop, kind of pop sounds and whatnot. But they even had it. I just looked into it. They even had an imprint for erotica at one point. Believe it or not, I didn't know that. But they had some really cool comics. Now these were biographies of the bands. They were 100% unauthorized. They actually got in some trouble because they did a comic on New Kids on the Block at one point, just to date, what time period this was. And they didn't, New Kids on the Block didn't take too kindly to that. There was like a lawsuit or whatever. And Revolutionary Comics was trying to champion free speech and stuff like that. They actually won the lawsuit, but they never re-put out the comic because they realized that their fans, their readers didn't care about New Kids on the Block. They wanted to keep it with the hard rock stuff, Yeah. So Revolutionary Comics, Hard Rock Comics line, I would follow them and love them, picking up the little biographies. Now, they were unauthorized biographies that they would contain one story, which was as closely as they could figure to the actual band's biography. They would listen to a lot of interviews and they really would do their research. In fact, this one here for the first Van Halen, there are two Van Halen ones. The first one covers the Roth years, and I'm going to cover both of them here. But the first one here, there's actually an interview with Sammy Hagar. Now this one starts with the beginnings, follows their career with David Lee Roth, and actually ends with David Lee Roth leaving for his solo career and Sammy Hagar joining the band. That's like the ending of it. And then the second one starts up with Sammy Hagar's tenure with the band, at least up into For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Sammy Hagar did an interview. It was in between For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge and Balance. And it's on YouTube. You can find it. And he's actually talking. He talks about these comic books. He doesn't mention the name because he talks about how, there's actually a comic book out there. He said, I don't want to mention the name because we're not making money off of it. He said, it was kind of cool. He said, they didn't bother suing them because they figured they got enough money anyway. But, these people are making money off of them. But he said that this first comic tells the story. And he said they must have really done their homework because the band actually read this comic during Sammy Hagar's time, and they were all saying, did we actually say some of that in interviews? How did that guy know that? I mean, down to the stuff that they actually said, in phone conversations and whatnot around the time that Roth was leaving and Sammy Hagar was being hired and everything like that. It was really sweet. So they, and you can imagine, of course, they ended up saying that in interviews. When you're as famous as Van Halen and you're interviewed all the time, I mean, every city, you can't keep track of all the things you say. So anyway, the people writing the comics did their due diligence. They did their research, which was awesome. So it would each comic issue of whatever band would feature one good long story, and the art was pretty decent in that story. Like I said, I showed you some of it here. Sometimes they were in color. Let's see. I'm trying to find a good image in here. This is the story here of they did a tour, a concert with Sammy Hagar when he was a solo act, but this was the famous moment when the guys from Van Halen actually it appeared that they parachuted into the venue to start. It was actually some professional paratroopers who parachuted in, and they jumped into a van, and then out from the van jumped Van Halen. But it was a pretty sweet gimmick, it was cool. So the art like that is really great. Now after this story that features the biography, Then there's usually a short little story of like a Mad Comics kind of parody, sort of making fun of the band or something like that. So and the art to that, the art in those kind of vary, as Mad Magazine, the artists, they don't really hire the greatest artists to do the little parody things, the well, here's an example. This was a little parody at the end of this Van Halen one. It's like that art, that's not that's not good proportions. That's, it's stylized, if you like something like that, whatever. But that was typically issue to issue what each one was, which one, consisted of. Cultural icons, because I deal with cultural mythology. Well, we mythologize our celebrities big time. I mean, Van Halen, the band, and then certainly Eddie Van Halen, he's a mythological character in our cultural mythology. What I mean by that is he's a real person, and it's great to learn about the real person, biographies and stuff. We'll talk about some of those in a second. But there's also this the persona, and when they're so ingrained in our public consciousness, like people who don't. It's kind of like Superman. I often say where you don't have to have ever picked up a comic book or looked at or seen a superhero movie in your life, and certain things about Superman. He's a hero. Clark Kent is his secret identity. Kryptonite, it hurts him. You just know those things is ingrained in our public consciousness. Same thing with Van Halen. I mean, I've talked to some of my students when we used to do analyses of music videos, just to kind of get them in critical analysis mode and thinking. I've talked to students from all sort of walks of life who didn't even remotely have any interest in rock. People who 100% hip hop all the way, or 100% country music or whatever. They all knew who Eddie Van Halen was, and they knew that he was this revolutionary rock guitar player, and they even had sort of a respect for him, even if they didn't really appreciate the music or anything. So it's a cultural icon. It's a mythology. So that's kind of how I'm justifying talking about these. And the comics are rare. They're not, they weren't Revolutionary Comics wasn't a huge company. In fact, the guy who started the company, I forget his name, was actually murdered tragically. And he had brought his father on to help run the company, and his father tried to run it a little while after that, but they didn't last very long. They're not putting things out still, but the reprints are sought after. So I've got a few more, Alice Cooper and a couple other ones, but I just figured it'd be a good series to do, and see what I can do. Van Halen, for the Van Halen band, it's got such a long lifespan, so many different phases. So this first one, I've got two. Well, I've got two of them here. I basically have the ones that I showed you there in terms of Van Halen. There's the Van Halen 1, with the Roth years right into Hagar, and then there's Van Halen 2, which is kind of a retelling a little bit of Roth, but it jumps Hagar up through For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, which was at the time that was printed. I also have for Sammy Hagar, he had a huge career on his own. He was in Montrose, and then he had a huge solo career before he even joined Van Halen. So this is kind of a catch-all. It has a short little Hagar story in it that's actually included in color in the Van Halen 1 here. But like I said, there's an interview out with Sammy Hagar where he talks about how this comic actually gets it extremely correct. The whole band read these, and even though they didn't promote them because they didn't get any royalties off of it, they were kind of in awe about how accurate it was. Let's start with this one first, as I keep talking about it. The Van Halen years, the early 70s into the 80s. 1984 was when David Lee Roth left Van Halen, went on solo, and Van Halen didn't know what they were going to do, for a while. Eventually got Sammy Hagar in. But there was a unique chemistry of the band. So it always bugs me. It kind of irritates me when I hear people, on the one hand, you're going to like one more than the other, usually. You're going to, some people are going to be more Van Hagar fans, and some people are going to be more Van Roth fans or whatever. That's natural. I'm certainly more of a Van Hagar fan. He's much more to my taste. But I hate it when people talk about that as though like they automatically hate the other one or the other person. So like, hey, Hagar is just awesome. He's a personal hero of mine. It doesn't mean I hate David Lee Roth. I don't think I'd ever want to be in the same room with David Lee Roth. He's not a personality I'd ever want to have to encounter or interact with. But man, you can't. I mean, even Sammy Hagar says you can't touch David Lee Roth as a performer. I mean, that man is he's born to entertain. I mean, he's got that charisma. He didn't have the greatest. He wasn't the greatest technical singer. That's not a matter of taste. That's just objective. He didn't have the greatest range, but what he lacked in range, he certainly made up for in showmanship. I was 5 years old when 1984 came out, their last album. So it's not like I ever saw them live with David Lee Roth, and even though he did come back and they were touring with David Lee Roth in the later years, Michael Anthony wasn't there anymore. It was kind of a new incarnation completely. So it wasn't that old thing there. But Noel Monk, their manager during that time, has written a wonderful biography. You know, he's going to have things in it that you'll disagree with, or they're going to conflict with other accounts and stuff like that. Sure, it's very well written, though. His ghostwriter was very well written, great prose style, very easy to follow, and a lot of good, interesting accounts and stuff like that in there. So, and that's just of that time, just of the David Lee Roth years. I mean, you had Eddie Van Halen, who is a technical genius, and the comic covers this. The comic does a great job covering this. I mean, Alex Van Halen is no schlump. You know, he's an amazing drummer, and he doesn't get the credit he deserves on the drums. He's a phenomenal drummer. I mean, crazy. I think especially you see them all evolve. You know, Eddie was kind of just amazing and a genius from the get-go, but you saw him develop and progress and branch out into other styles and kind of stuff, you know, throughout their career. I do think you saw both Alex and Michael Anthony, though, who started out amazing instrumentalists on their instruments, but you saw them even improve a lot as instrumentalists. You know, you can really see that. By the time For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, that's actually my favorite Van Halen album. If I had to pick one, it's hard to pick one because they're all just so great. But For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge is probably my favorite. But by that time, I mean, listen to the stuff that, you know, we're just talking about Alex right now on the drums. He's a powerhouse, crazy powerhouse. Maybe not crazy versatile or anything, but as a rock drummer, you can't top him. But Eddie was the genius. Eddie's the one who's always taking apart guitars, putting them back together. And true genius, what I mean is he's not somebody who was classically trained. I mean, he did kind of, his parents, you know, they grew up in Europe before they moved over, and you know, in Amsterdam and whatnot, and they were classically trained to the piano. Their father was a jazz musician, and they eventually switched over, but they weren't huge music readers or anything like that. They weren't like, you know, going to conservatories for music theory or anything like that. Eddie was just somebody who had that natural gift. And it was really, I don't want to say this in terms of, this is the kind of people that really make it into our cultural mythology. So for Eddie Van Halen, for example, I don't mean this, I didn't know him, all right? And I don't mean this as an insult at all. So I'm speaking in very general terms, but music was like the one thing he was incredibly good at. And this is usually the case with people who are that amazing at something. You know, it's kind of, it's rare that you see somebody who's that phenomenal and revolutionary and just so effortless at something who can also be that good or even somewhat competent at something else, you know. High school, they took a little bit of community college before they just dropped it and decided to go for the band completely, you know, so they're not, you know, incredibly educated, and there are stories about that, this or that, you know, at first anyway. And but he knew that guitar, and he took it apart. He wasn't an engineer. He didn't know how things worked. He would put them back together. There's one interview where he talks about, he's showing a tour of his studio, and he picks up the Frankenstrat, which is that one he's playing right there, that Frankenstrat, which is the one he built, took it apart and customized it and everything. And he got it back at one point, and there's a pickup switch or whatever that he didn't know how to put it back together properly, and it didn't matter because he liked the sound. So he just kind of had it jammed in there with some matchsticks, you know, or matchbooks rather, you know, just kind of crushed it in there. And that's what he was playing with. And they were throwing sold out arenas, you know, with this guitar that he just kind of took apart and put together on his own. Phenomenal, amazing musician. During the Roth years, the magic of that is that it's a learning phase for all of them. So they did all, even Roth, develop. Yeah, even they did all develop into something else later. But there was a special magic chemistry, just a special chemistry unique to themselves there, to those four that they had during those years. And it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. I've talked about Eddie, I've talked about Dave a little bit and Alex, but I've got to get to my favorite member of the band is Michael Anthony. And I know I'm a bass player, so of course I'm going to like the bass player a little bit. Yeah, that's kind of why, but it's so much more than that. I was always drawn growing up to I read the autobiography, or the biographies rather, of Led Zeppelin growing up. Led Zeppelin, I was huge into them as well. I've got their comics somewhere, but I would read about them, and you read about the antics and the crazy, out of the world nature that Robert Plant and Jimmy Page and Bonham, you know, John Bonham, of course, the things they did, the nutso things they did, they were just out of control. And it's natural. Van Halen did the same thing. When you take a bunch of people that young, you know, young adults straight out of high school, basically, and give them that much power, money, free reign, attention, they're going to get themselves into all kinds of trouble. And I remember being so fascinated with John Paul Jones, the bass player for Led Zeppelin, who just never was into that. He was just such a together person. He was so content and cool. And I thought, that's awesome. You know, it's cool that he played bass, because that's me. I'm not Mr. Charismatic, Mr. Jump up in front of the stage and lead a show or anything. You know, I'd play my bass and that was fine. I had no stage fright or anything. But, that was me. I liked that kind of just laying it down and being a good groove, with the bass. I wasn't into like leading the crowd. And so I appreciated bass players like that. And Michael Anthony is absolutely that. All of the biographies I've read of Van Halen all talk about Michael Anthony was just a nice guy, absolute nice guy. He's not like one of he doesn't have the tempers. He didn't get into it with other pianists, even when they attacked him, and they would bully him sometimes, when this or that member of the band got a little too high or big for their britches, and whatever, they'd bully poor Mike, but he was just such a cool guy. He already had that contentment in his life. He didn't need to spit on other people to get it. Love that. And he's an amazing bass player. It kind of ticks me off that every time Michael Anthony comes up in like a Van Halen retrospective, and let me just, know you're talking about Van Halen, Michael Anthony, the bassist right there. This was him in the Roth years. There he is, there. I like that they for these comics books, they would take actual promotional photos of the band. There's Michael Anthony. Whoop, there. Sorry. They would take promotional photos of the band, and the artist would recreate him. So it's pretty sweet. But he's an amazing bassist. He really is. He's solid. That's the kind of bass playing that I like. I'm not, when it comes to bassists, if you are a bassist, Crispy, you probably know what I mean. If you're a bass player and somebody's like, "Oh, you're a bass player. Can you play that song by Rush? Can you play that song by Red Hot Chili Peppers? Play the Seinfeld intro." The average person doesn't really get bass, and they think that if you're a bass player of worth your salt, you're automatically going to start whipping out some solo or something like that, or playing some crazy nut job, slapping all around or something like that. That's a certain kind of bass playing, but it's not to my taste at all. I can't listen to Rush or even Red Hot Chili Peppers for that long. It's a wonderful, they're amazingly talented. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but I like bass that actually does the job of bass in a song, which is to bridge the drums and the guitars, bridge that with harmony, lay down the groove, know when to pick your runs, know when to kind of shine and fill in holes, but also know what notes not to play, know when to hang back. That's so important. And for that kind of bass playing, it takes that personality of a Michael Anthony or a John Paul Jones. It takes that kind of personality. That's what I love. I just get so excited when I'm listening to a song and I hear the bass. It's jiving with the drums so well, and it's picking the fills. It's filling in where it wants to, but it's not about, look what I can do. That's the guitarist. That's the singer. The bass is there, more worried about the overall sound. And Michael Anthony's amazing. So it kind of ticks me off when people are like a Van Halen retrospective and they get to Michael Anthony and they automatically go to, and Michael Anthony, a lot of people don't realize his backing vocals were just amazing. They were the signature sound of Van Halen. All of that's true. And I'll talk about that in a second. Come on. Are you not going to talk about his bass playing? His bass playing is amazing. And it's usually people just aren't educated enough about music and how it comes together to either really understand the bass's role in a song or to understand that type of bass player who's really there to fill in, to add to the sound, not to stand out as a lead person, Anyway, you had that magic chemistry of these four, which was just phenomenal. You go and you can look up, like I said, I was 5 years old when 1984 came out, their last album together with this combo. So it's not like I ever saw them live, but you can look at the videos, YouTube. The great glorious thing about YouTube is so much of this is at your fingertips, music and videos of live shows. It's just phenomenal. These bands are great. I am going to do, like I said, it's kind of hard just to focus on the Roth years because I'm such a Van Hagar fan, but I want to do it as justice. So I think I might wait and talk about that.